Welcome to episode 37 of Rail Talk. My name is Joe Bianca. I'm an ownership advisor at West Point Thoroughbreds. And John, hate to see the loss on Saturday, but I think we confirmed I'm not bad luck because I wasn't there this time either. And you didn't get the trophy. I'm sorry, bud.
You didn't get the trophy. Jon Green, general manager of DJ Stable. I'm finally done licking my wounds. But Joe, as poorly as we finished in the three races that we ran in, how about a little homer for West Point Thoroughbreds stake winner down in Florida? So it was good to see you guys in the winner's circle down there, even if we were banned from existence.
I don't know how beautiful the people that we had were. They're all beautiful in my mind, but I don't know if they were beautiful enough for Belinda. But yeah, it was fun. It was a nice win. First off the layoff, first time US, great grade 2 performance. Joel Rosario was the best. That's all I got to say. Let's start the show. Rail Talk is sponsored by Fasig-Tipton. We are on the eve. We're recording this on Wednesday, April 3rd. We're on the eve of the April digital sale, which runs the 4th through the 9th. You've heard me talk up the digital sales before, but they really are a growing sector of the auction market, and Fasig-Tipton's at the forefront of it. It's super, super easy to enter and buy horses out of. And then the May digital sale follows that up, May 9th through the 14th. After that, the Mid-Atlantic 2-year-olds in training sale in Timonium, Maryland. The Undertax show is May 14th through the 16th, and then the sale will be that following Monday and Tuesday after the Preakness, May 20th through the 21st. Love those kind of sales that are in the thick, in the heat of Derby season, Preakness season, Triple Crown season. Gets all the buyers dreaming, and Fasig does a great job of promoting that sale. And then we'll have the June digital sale, May 30th through June 4th. Mid-Atlantic 2-year-olds in training on June 26th. And then we'll move into yearling season, starting with the July race selected of horses of racing age sale July 8th, then the July yearling sale July 9th, and a couple other digital sales. And then Saratoga, the cream of the crop, will be there. West Point will be there, well represented, August 5th and the 6th in Saratoga Springs. If you haven't been to that sale yet, you got to go. It's an event with plenty of action in the digital realm and on the sales grounds in the meantime at Fasig. So it was a big weekend of Derby preps. I got a Dubai World Cup card. Tink, our friend Tink / Tony is going to be back on the show in a little bit to break all that down. But in our neck of the woods, the most important result was in the Florida Derby. Hades was 5th in that race. We can ask John in a second about what the Derby plans are for him. But I just thought my takeaway from Fierceness running away to that huge win was that Johnny V kind of knew he screwed up in the Holy Bull. And I was saying this last week on a West Point podcast. I felt like if he could do it over, he would have just sent Fierceness to the lead and said, come and catch me. And instead, he got a little bit cute, thinking Hades was going to come back to him. And it didn't happen. Took no prisoners on Saturday, popped right out to the front from that 10 hole and just kept widening in the stretch. Obviously, in terms of pound for pound talent, Fierceness is the best 3-year-old in the country. Question becomes, does he need that perfect loose on the lead trip in order to show his best? So far, he's done that 3 times, and then 2 times when he didn't have things his own way, he kind of folded the tent. So that'll be the question on Derby Day. We'll have plenty of time to debate that because he's going to be a short price, assuming he makes it to the race. But John, just from a perspective of someone who was on the ground watching the race, what were your impressions?
Thanks, Joe. And it's amazing because I was watching the race, and as soon as going to the first turn, I turned to the person next to me and I was like, we're screwed, because not even so much that Fierceness got the lead by himself, but also the fact that we got kind of shut off and banged around a little bit. But that's racing. I mean, that's, you can't, for all the advantages that we got in the Holy Bull, it all came back kind of karma wise to bring it back to earth as far as where we were sitting in the Florida Derby. Thankfully, our horse is fine. He's sound. He's doing well. But to go back to Fierceness, I think that even going into the race, the common thought was Fierceness, pound for pound, is the best horse in the crop. There's no question. I mean, he runs off the charts when he gets everything his own way. He's the girl with the curl. When he's good, he's great, and when he's bad, he's horrid. And Johnny V, to his credit, did everything in his power to make sure that he broke from the 10 hole and went out there. I think there were a couple of scratches that helped them. Obviously their own horse bailed us out, had some speed, and they decided not to run. The other speed in the race, Seminole Chief, was definitely a runoff horse and could have pushed Fierceness out had he run, but he didn't. And that's the way the race played out. So tip of the cap to Fierceness. I actually tweeted out after the race, he showed today that he's a champion.
Very classy.
And I think it's right for racing. And the horse Fierceness, rightfully so, will be one of the favorites in the Derby. He'll certainly be the story because he's the 2-year-old champion and he's coming in. And there'll certainly be a lot of fanfare in there. I don't think he's going to get the lead as easily as he did in the Florida Derby, the same as we didn't get the lead as easily as we did in the Holy Bull. But that's why these races make so much, for me, have so much intrigue. Because you get to follow the horses and their stories, and I wouldn't bet against Fierceness in the Kentucky Derby. I still think that he's the best horse in the crop, but he needs to have it picture perfect, and it's tough with a 19 horse field to have things go absolutely picture perfect.
Yeah, the draw is going to be very important for him. And we'll have a sense after this coming weekend at the last big round of Derby preps, what the field shape is going to look like. We'll have a better sense of what the pace will be like because, that's going to be the question, whether or not he can bring his top effort, I think, whether or not he's able to get an unencumbered trip. There was another big Derby prep over the weekend, Muth winning the Arkansas Derby. I loved him in that race. I didn't really bet the race, but I thought he should have been favored over Timberlake just because he had the better speed in a race that didn't have much early foot. Just Steele ran big to be second. I don't know about you, but I didn't love a couple of the strides that he was taking in the stretch of that race. So I hope he's all right, but he worried me a little bit coming down the stretch running second to Muth. But obviously Muth can't run in the Derby unless something changes. But seems like there might be something that changes coming up before the Kentucky Derby because Amr Zidane, obviously the owner of Medina Spirit from the DQ a couple of years ago and several top Derby contenders like Muth and Maymoon, is going to sue or is suing Churchill Downs to get an injunction on the rule that Bob Baffert is not allowed to run horses at the Churchill meet, at the Kentucky Derby specifically, and hoping that is enough to get the protocol reversed and Baffert into the gate pending further legal action. I've seen these temporary injunctions work. I think back a lot to the Trump administration, all the horrible shit he would do. And then thankfully there would be a federal judge that would have an injunction and stop him from doing that kind of horrible shit. This is obviously much lower stakes, but I do think it from observation has a chance to work. Jon, as someone whose horse might be on the cusp points wise going into the Derby, you obviously have a vested interest in this, but as a quasi journalist, you also can just give us your take on from that side.
Yeah, I would say quasi is the most important word of that entire sentence, Joe. Absolutely.
I love quasi.
Quasi. Let's take Hades out of the equation and say that he's not going to have enough points to get in, so I can be a little less biased on this conversation. I don't think it's going to work. I thought it was interesting. Two things I thought were interesting. Number one is that Zidane actually is the only one who is named on the suit. None of Bob Baffert's other owners are named in the suit. Bob Baffert himself is not a party of this suit. So this is a rogue renegade going at it alone because he's got the money and the wherewithal to do it. If Muth didn't win the Arkansas Derby so impressively, would this have gone forward? I don't know. You got to ask Zidane about that. But I'll guarantee you that if the horse ran up the racetrack and a bad fifth, that this probably wouldn't have happened. I thought it was interesting that the three arguments that Zidane's attorney presented in the suit, and I'm going to read these so I don't screw it up, Joe. Number one is that the extension of Churchill Downs' ban is not grounded in any contractual or common law. Okay, it's a private entity, a private club, so they don't have to, but that's neither here nor there. It defies the authority of HISA. I don't know why that makes a difference. Whether or not their banning of a horse is in deference to the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Authority. And number three, it threatens the value of the Kentucky Derby. Well, that's the most asinine argument I think that you can make, because wouldn't Churchill Downs try to do everything in their power to increase the value of the Kentucky Derby?
The one thing they do very well.
Yeah, so exactly. So why would threatening the devaluation, why would they shoot themselves in the foot and devalue the Kentucky Derby by purposely holding out that horse? That out of all of them is the most nonsensical. But if that's your third best argument and that's nonsensical and the other two are kind of iffy, you're on very shaky ground. I think this is a desperation Hail Mary pass that they're trying to get done in order to get Muth in. One thing that they didn't stress in the argument that they made that I think was a better discussion point is that Zaydan did not buy any big ticket items, big ticket 2-year-olds that would be eligible for this year's Derby. So last year, he really did not buy any major expensive 2-year-olds. And I think that's the argument you can make is that, hey, this guy spent tens of millions of dollars on horseflesh with the idea of getting him into the Kentucky Derby in previous years. And because he knew that this year he was going to be eligible, he went back and bought and went back and reinvested. So I guess 2 years ago, he did not invest. I should rephrase it. 2 years ago, he did not invest. Last year, he plunked $11 million, give or take, on colts that would be eligible for this year's Derby. To me, that would be the argument is, look, for years and years, I spent millions of dollars. I stopped during the window that I knew my horses wouldn't be eligible because of my association with Bob Baffert. And now last year, I went back and spent $11 million on colts that would be eligible for the Kentucky Derby. I nominated them for the Kentucky Derby, and yet you still opted to not allow me to campaign them in the Kentucky Derby. That, to me, is your best argument. Again, I'm not an attorney, and I'm hardly a journalist.
Quasi. I just think, I think the argument that they really had no legal basis for continuing to exclude him makes a lot of sense. I agree that the other ones, like, I think him not being in the Derby devalues the Derby in that, in the court of public opinion, people might put an asterisk on this Derby if Bob has some of the best horses and they're not in the race. But in terms of the actual monetary value, you think people that had tickets to the Kentucky Derby 150 are canceling their tickets because Baffert's horse aren't going to be in there? You think that town still isn't going to be swarmed with tourists and revelers? Like, it's still going to be just as big of a party and just as big of a moneymaker for Churchill Downs as possible. I'm so tired of these stories, honestly. Like, I'm so looking forward to it being in the rear view, and Baffert, whatever you think about him, can compete in the Kentucky Derby just as readily as anybody else, barring future drug positives or embarrassment to the Derby, which is in the cards potentially. I wouldn't rule it out. Similarly, there was the final resolution of the 2018 Santa Anita Derby this week. So about 6 years in, we finally got the redistribution of the purse because, as we remember, Justify tested positive or had an overage for a substance in that race that he wasn't allowed to have that level for. And Bolt Doro ran second in that race. Mick Ruiz being a big stink about this, about getting Bolt Doro put up to first rather in the Santa Anita Derby. That finally happened. And big surprise, none of the bettors that needed Bolt Doro that day got a single cent out of this. I'm still really gets me a little crispy thinking about Medina Spirit and Mandaloon in the 2021 Derby and the amount of money I would have won. I was alive for like $7,000 in the pick 4 from Mandaloon in that race. And lo and behold, Mandaloon is the winner of the Kentucky Derby. Juddmonte cashed that check. Brad Cox got that check. And here I am still wanting desperately that 7,000 I should have had, but I'm not going to get it. That's the plight of the horse player. It's frustrating, like seeing these DQ results, knowing that on my end of the spectrum, on our end of the spectrum, the horse player end, it's never going to be made right. Rail Talk is sponsored by TaylorMade. TaylorMade has a friendly reminder on their website right now that we're 28 days away, 4 weeks away from the May 1st summer yearling sales deadline. So those deadlines are going to start to roll in and sneak up on you before you know it. And if you do have a horse, if you do have a yearling that you want to prep for the sales, there's no better place to go than TaylorMade. They take care of the horses and their clients like their family. They are a leading consignor regularly at the major yearling sales. They'll continue to be that later this year as we get closer and closer to the summer. TaylorMade is the cream of the crop for a reason. They have a great staff full of people with deep experience in the business, taking care of the animals and the clients. They'll market your horses properly. They'll enter your horses properly. So just let them take the helm for your nice yearlings that you got coming up for the summer and the fall, and you won't be disappointed. They do a great job every single year. Shout out to the entire TaylorMade team for all their hard work. So the time has come. Not only do we have a graphic, but we have a camera on the man of the hour in horse racing and horse racing Twitter. Our friend Tinky / Tony Cobitz. Welcome back to the show, my man. Good to see you.
Woo! Thank you very much. Pleasure to be with you and in living color for a change.
Hell yeah.
Although I do like the icon that has been with me for 20 years, but this is a nice change of pace.
Well, now that we've seen you in person, I think maybe we should go back to the icon.
I was thinking of wearing a baseball cap, but then, given that it only makes me about 2 or 3 years younger, I decided it's probably not worth it.
Is there a little bit of a beard there? Can you fit in with this the bearded crew? Okay, good.
Little bit.
I had to zoom in on my screen.
Yeah.
All right,
that's what she said. Anyway, all right.
Hey,
all right. We're off to a rollicking start.
So okay, now we're all out in the open. Now we can just chat racing, and everyone can put away their petty grievances for Tink Tank / Tinky's Corner. Let's get into the racing from this past weekend. You know, it was the second to last big Derby prep weekend. Obviously, the final one is this Saturday with the Bluegrass and the Wood and the Santa Anita Derby. But we had in the Florida Derby, obviously the most impressive performance of any horse thus far in 2024, I would say, by any horse from the 2022 crop, or 2021 crop, excuse me. Fierceness ran away with the Florida Derby by 13.5 lengths, put on the lead by Johnny V this time, blew him apart with a 110 buyer. In Arkansas, we had a Bob Baffert winner in Muth, who obviously at this point cannot run in the Derby, though things might change, and we'll get to that in a little bit. And also we had the big Dubai World Cup card this past weekend. So I know Tinky's got a lot of opinions on all three of those, but let's start with Fierceness and the Florida Derby. What was your reaction? And, take us a little bit deeper in terms of the analysis of Fierceness and the Derby, Tink.
Well, I don't think it was much of a surprise to anyone that he won the race and won it impressively. All of the evidence to date suggests that he is one of those type of horses that is feast or famine when things go his way. Doesn't mean he necessarily needs the lead, but he needs to race freely, it appears. And when he's able to dominate the pace, and it was not a very fast pace early in the Florida Derby, he's going to be a very difficult horse to beat, if not impossible, at least by his 3-year-old peers. So not a big surprise, but until proven otherwise, I think it's probably very reasonable to assume that he's a horse that will be vulnerable if he doesn't get a good, clean trip in the Derby. And, that raises some interesting questions, as I mentioned in a recent post. I'm not expecting anyone to do anything, overt, like attempting to bump him out of the gate and knock him off stride, anything like that. But he actually would be a prime candidate for a horse with quality speed to put pressure on. He could be vulnerable to that. And if the Derby were not invariably oversubscribed, it'd be a terrific opportunity for a deep-pocketed owner to employ a rabbit that has high-quality 6 furlong speed. It's not something we've seen at least used effectively, I don't think, for a very long time now. Phil Tynowitz employed one way back in the day when he owned Crypto Clarence, and did so effectively. Crypto Clarence was a one-run horse and needed help with the pace up front. I think it's a perfectly legitimate option if there was the opportunity for an owner to employ a rabbit. But I don't think it's likely to happen because the Derby's oversubscribed, and I don't think any of these owners are going to have 2 entrants, one of which is going to be sacrificed in that way. but it would be very interesting to see. What I think is more interesting, in a way, about the Fierceness Pletcher connection and the fact that the horse will almost undoubtedly be a strong favorite in the Derby is Pletcher's Derby record overall. This is no secret. Everyone knows that he's run a lot of horses in the Derby and has not won many. He's, I believe, literally 2 wins from 64 starters in his career, and a grand total of 6 combined second and third place finishers. Now, it's fascinating to me that this is the case, given how dissonant it is with almost everything that we know about how people judge horses and trainers in the American racing industry. We know that that owners fall over one another to give horses to trainers who win at high percentages. We know that owners and breeders are attracted to stallions that record the best stats. We know that people who spend the most money at the 2-year-old sales are inclined to focus on those that have breezed the fastest times, etc. And yet here we have a record that is so poor that I feel very confident in asserting it will never be eclipsed. It will never be beaten, so to speak. No one will ever record a more poor record in the Derby than Todd Pletcher has. Now, this is not a criticism of Todd specifically. It's a criticism of the popularity of the Kentucky Derby, which most people, the vast majority of the people in the game, spin as being a positive, where I and some other who are not convinced believe that, in fact, the hype around the Derby, and especially the fairly pungent way in which the owners of good 3-year-olds push to get their horses into the Derby, whether or not they have realistic chances of winning, whether or not it's best for the horse's development to their full potential, etc. This is highly dissonant with seeking out high percentage opportunities. Obviously, a horse like Fierceness has a much better chance than a 1 in 30 chance of winning the Derby. So yes, you have to judge these horses on an individual basis that Todd brings to the big dance. But at the same time, I think it's a real indictment that Todd, whose mentor, of course, Wayne Lucas, was the one who was perhaps the first to recognize the true potential of, I believe he coined the phrase, I may be wrong, I'll be happy to be corrected, the Saturday horse. Wayne understood that owners with big money were far more excited by having horses run in stakes races, win or lose on big races, let alone the Derby, than running in maiden allowance races, during the week. And so he made that a primary component of his business model. Now, Todd has taken it to another level and has been, by most metrics, wildly successful, which is again why this is so fascinating. 2 for 64. And yet it has enriched him greatly because his owners are perfectly happy to shrug it off if their horses finish up the track, obviously, and they're going right back into their pockets at the subsequent Keeneland, yearling sales to try it again. So it's not Todd's fault that owners are willing to do this, but I don't think that it's good for the game for a variety of reasons, and I certainly don't think that it's good for the horses, broadly speaking, because if it weren't for that, these horses would be developed in a very different way. In Europe, the milers, and there are mostly milers that run in the Derby, some of them get the trip or seem to get the trip, but many of them or most of them don't. There's a real series of races, of course, culminating with the 2,000 guineas in England, but the equivalent in France as well, in Australia, in Japan, and most countries. Here, we don't really have that kind of dedicated series of races for horses that really aren't ideally suited to 10 or 12 furlongs like the classic races. And I think it's a real shame. So those are my thoughts on Fierceness and Pletcher. What do you guys think?
I would love to ask Jon about follow-up on that before he gets into his next topic. Because Jon, you can speak to this as an owner. It's a big attraction to have a horse in the Derby or a horse in a $1 million race who doesn't necessarily fit on paper, but has the qualifications. It's obviously a great attention to have your silks in a top level grade 1 race. Like, can you talk a little bit about the kind of back and forth that you might do, maybe not you personally, but owners might do in their mind about whether or not it's right to run a horse in a race that's going to be 20, 30 to 1?
Yeah, I think there's two things that add value to that specific race. One is within racing, one is outside of racing. And I think you have to realize that a lot of people who own horses in the industry do so because there's some panache, there's some sexiness to it. They want to be in sports, they want to be in competition, but they can't afford to buy the Yankees, they probably could afford to buy the Jets because they stink, but that's a whole nother therapy session. But most of them don't have billions of dollars and a stellar background to be able to go through the process of buying a major sports team. So, the barrier of entry for sports for most people is easiest coming into the horse industry. And when they are at their cocktail parties or they're playing pickleball or they're talking amongst their friends and somebody says, you have a horse. Have you ever run in the Derby? Like, that's the first question. I don't know anything about NASCAR, but my first question would be, have you ever driven a Talladega? Because that's the only thing I know. So there's this outside sexiness of being able to run in the Kentucky Derby, that from outside of the industry. And then within the industry, the whole breeding industry is based on those Saturday races. That's where the value is. And if a horse earns $100,000, the hard way by winning $10,000 claiming races, that's great. But unless that filly is royally bred, she ain't making it into the gene pool. So you have to be able to get black type at some level. And then once you get black type at the minimum level, or restricted level, then the next thing that's adding value is to get I call it a G next to your name, get a graded stakes place next to your name. And the industry for so many years has put the value on the Triple Crown, and specifically on the first race of the Triple Crown, which is the Kentucky Derby, to the point where they've expanded the gate from 12 horses to 14 horses to 20 horses, because that is what the industry tries to perpetuate as the most important race. It's the most important race for 3-year-olds. It's the most important race on somebody's resume. Arguably, it's more important for breeders than even the Breeders' Cup Classic. I don't necessarily agree with that, but there's a good argument there that can be made for either one. So I understand the hype and the reason why people push their horses for the Kentucky Derby, because of internal pressures and value and external pressures and value. That being said, if you don't have a horse that's worthy of being in the Derby, you as an owner have to make a choice, because your horse, you want to chase that dream, because that's what the industry and externally is also pushing you for. But you also want to be in the experience. And the Breeders' Cup has done a great job of making the races now into a weekend of experiences. And the Kentucky Derby and the Kentucky Oaks have also marketed it internally, where it is the place to be seen. There are parties, there are pageants, there are interview opportunities for you to be seen. And for a lot of people, again, in the industry, it's not a matter of the money. They have the money. It's a matter of being important in the industry and having the ego. And I fall into that category. Otherwise, I wouldn't do this podcast. As much as I love talking to you guys, there's a part of an ego stroke that's involved that allows me to kind of speak my mind and have a platform for it. And I don't kid myself. If we didn't have horses in these graded stake races and everything like that, I would have the same. I would be just as important as any other owner in the industry who doesn't have a platform like this. So I take it very seriously. So I know I'm rambling a little bit, but I guess the bottom line for me is that the Derby holds such value, and the fact that there's 20,000 foals born every year, and 20 of them, in essence, get into the Derby, such a small percentage, that it's something you can hang your hat on and put your chest out about. I ran a horse in the Derby, to the point, guys, where, this isn't public record, but since it's our podcast, I'll release it. I mean, we're working hard to try to figure out if I can get Hades into the Lexington to see if I can get enough points to run in the Derby, because it's not so much as I want to run him in the Derby because I want the experience, but if I cross that last race out of the Florida Derby and, said he got sawed off and didn't really run his race, I can make the argument that he's probably still one of the top 15 3-year-old colts in the country. And if he is, then he deserves a spot. I need to do everything in my power to try to get that horse into the Derby. Now, is it going to change his value at the end of his career? No, he's a gelding. Is it going to add anything other than just it's a big race that I think he can win? Yeah, that's a big part of it. So it's part ego, it's part money, it's part prestige, and it's resume building for my horse and quite frankly for me.
Yeah, no, I mean that's what I was looking for. Yeah, because there's got to be that internal debate, as an owner. But Tink, there's another horse that, I mean, you're free to respond to John's point as well, but there's another horse that you focused on in particular for you to think that probably doesn't belong on the Derby. And initially the trainer said he wasn't going, but now it seems like there's pressure from the owner if you want to take it from there.
Yeah, endlessly the winner of the Jeff Ruby Stakes at Turfway recently, impressive winner, a horse that has raced exclusively on grass and synthetics. A horse that I think is arguably bred more to be a grass horse than a dirt horse. And most importantly of all of the information that we have, all of the variables, clearly his trainer, Mike McCarthy, who right after the Jeff Ruby was run, said we're looking at the American Turf Stakes at Churchill on the undercard of the Derby. His effort was a really solid one, but, quote, I think his best days down the road are on turf. And then a week later, yesterday, things have changed because the owners, Jon Ammerman and perhaps his brother, McCarthy was quoted as saying, we're going to go ahead and see what happens here for the next few weeks. The owner would like to keep all of his options open. Mr. Ammerman, this is an interesting phrasing, I think. I'm quoting McCarthy. Mr. Ammerman wants to be very open-minded about it and feels that there is an opportunity out there. Are we leaning toward the Derby? The answer is yes. He went on to say, quote, the horse's works on the dirt have been very workmanlike. They've been decent.
That means slow.
That means slow.
Right. Workmanlike is not. Yes, it's not
it's not what you want to be called by your partner or spouse. Your approach to fill in the blank was workmanlike. It was really.
Yeah. So look, I don't want to be too harsh here. There always is a possibility that a horse like this, because high-class horses are the most likely of all race horses to overcome difficult obstacles. They typically have a certain athleticism, and many of them have the sort of heart that allows them to overcome difficult obstacles. Maybe Endlessly will be one of those horses. I cannot say with certainty that he couldn't win the race. But what I can say with certainty is that all of the available information suggests that he's going to prove best on different surfaces, on grass and synthetic surfaces. And that if that information is informing us accurately, and usually it does when you have this kind of information,
right,
then there is an additional risk that something could go wrong. I'm not predicting anything like that, and I would be very sad if that happened, obviously. But if a horse doesn't handle a surface well, it's like a dirt horse on an off track, and it doesn't like off tracks, they're more likely to injure themselves on a type of track that they're struggling over. So there is that aspect to this as well.
Right.
And so, yes, of course, it's the Ammerman's horse and they can do what they like. But as I mentioned in the post that I wrote yesterday, there certainly is a history of some trainers. I'm not being critical of McCarthy, who is not really at that stage yet. But, Charlie Whittingham ran very few horses in the Derby. Shug, Graham Motion, Christophe Clement, Richard Mandela, Bill Mott, these trainers, with rare exceptions, are not going to run a horse in the Derby if they really feel that it's the wrong thing to do for the horse. And I'm just sad that it takes that level of stature to be able to do that. The vast majority of trainers are either under so much pressure. Look, the Ammermans are very important owners. I don't blame McCarthy at all for yielding. What else can he do if he wants to keep the owners, right?
Right.
But I still think that it's a dubious, if they choose to go, it will be a dubious decision.
Well, McCarthy had a choice, Tony, in my estimation, because if he really didn't want the horse to run on anything other than turf, then there were a lot of other options for him other than to bring him to the Jeff Ruby stake. It's almost like it's self-fulfilling prophecy. If he really thought the horse was just a turf horse, and I'm not arguing either way, but if he really thought the horse was just a turf horse, then keep him on the turf. There's a great series at Gulfstream. There's a great series at Keeneland and at Churchill for him to be able to make a lot of money in graded stake races with his horse Endlessly as the favorite on the turf. So I think the idea was that they tried him on the Tapeta because, at the back of their minds, whether it was the owner or the trainer, they knew this was going to be the end result if he won on the Tapeta. I think the bigger question is, why is the Jeff Ruby stake and the Battaglia even points? Why do they even have Derby points when no turf races in the United States have points for for those races? So it's like, and I think this goes back to what Joe and I were talking about before in the past about all the graded stake races that were upgraded and downgraded, and not one graded stake race in Kentucky was downgraded. And I think there's such a contingency. Anyway, there's another argument about contingency about why it's so important to have points races in Kentucky. These, in my opinion, these turfway races should not have Derby points assigned to them, because you're asking a horse to do something completely different when they go from the Tapeta to the dirt. And they're keeping points. It doesn't matter that I'm on the outside looking in or inside looking out as far as Hades, but they really shouldn't be taking the places of other horses that have competed and succeeded on the dirt when these horses are unknown. Especially Endlessly is unknown on the dirt. He's never run on it, but he's run even better numbers on the turf. I'm sorry to interrupt. It was just.
No, it's no problem. And I agree with you. I agree with you completely. That's part of the reason that I thought that the synthetic experiment at Keeneland was likely to fail, is because bluegrass has been such a historically important 3-year-old race that it was going to degrade that, which it did, even though there were some horses that ran well in the Derby out of that bluegrass on synthetic. But right. I agree with you completely. Joe, you have some thoughts?
Yeah, and I mean, I don't feel that strongly about it. I think John, like John said or didn't say, having a horse that's on the cusp of the Derby probably influences your feelings a little bit there. But you have been beating that drum for a little while.
I've been pretty consistent though with that.
I got you.
Yeah.
I got you. But it does. Yep. It would behoove you for that not to have points, especially if Endlessly decides to go.
Right.
Yeah, I don't feel that strongly about it. It's two races. They have produced a Derby winner before. I know it was a long time ago in Animal Kingdom, but I don't think it's inconceivable that a horse comes out of that race and runs well. Didn't Rich Strike? I feel like Rich Strike ran in one of those races and then won the Derby at 5 million to 1. So I don't feel that strongly about it. But there was another interesting result from the weekend I want to get your take on, Tony. And it was Laurel River in the Dubai World Cup, winning by a record 8.5 lengths. Like that's pretty impressive because there's been some blowout wins in the Dubai World Cup. So he set the record for biggest win margin. And he was an interesting horse because he was a Juddmonte homebred, was with Bob Baffert for the first couple of seasons of his career. Really couldn't keep it together. Had 7 starts in his first 3 seasons with Bob Baffert. Was last seen with Baffert in August of 2022, winning the Pat O'Brien Stakes by 3 3/4 lengths with a 108 buyer. Obviously, something went amiss after that. He resurfaces this year, about a year and a half later, almost in the barn of what was the guy's name? Bupat Seymour, who I've never heard of. Obviously, I don't follow Dubai racing all that closely, but he doesn't strike me as a huge name, even in that corner of the world. I'm always just curious about the stories of horses like this, like how they end up going halfway across the world to a totally different trainer and then popping up and winning a big race like 2 years after he really burst onto the scene. He's now a 6-year-old. We'll see what he does the rest of the year. But Tony, what was your impression of that? The horse that used to be a Bob Baffert horse disappears for a year and a half, pops up, wins the Dubai World Cup for local connections. It was a wild story.
Yes, it was. And look, visually, it was extraordinarily impressive. The rails seemed to be very good and so on and so forth, but still, he just skipped away from them in a remarkable performance. Now, as you point out, he showed high-class ability in the U.S. when he was with Baffert. His trainer in Dubai, I think, is actually fairly well known.
Is he?
Son of a trainer who had a lot of success in that part of the world, and he's building a reputation for himself even before this horse, I think. But in any case, I thought that there were 2 particularly interesting aspects of the Laurel River story. One of them, to go back to the point in 2022 at which he was in Baffert's barn, is that yes, his last race was in the Pat O'Brien in August in California, but he was actually being pointed for the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile at Keeneland that year, and he was scratched the morning before that race by the regulatory veterinarians. Baffert's response from a Daily Racing Form article was, quote, "He looked healthy to us and he was moving well. They said they didn't like something about him. They scratched him and there's no arguing with them." Now, as I mentioned in a brief post about this, it is not uncommon for trainers who do not willingly scratch one of their horses before a big race to take issue with the regulatory vets who force a scratch. And I would go so far as to say that at times they have good reason to complain. Just to use one example, if it's an older horse, and all older horses are arthritic to some extent, they may not move very well in their slower paces. And there may be a situation where the vets are being ultra conservative, not happy with the way a horse jogs, when in fact that's how the horse has been jogging before its races for 2 years or whatever. I'm just using a hypothetical example. So I'm not reflexively opposed to trainers reacting adversely to a horse being scratched in a forced manner like that. But let's put this into perspective with Laurel River. The horse did not race for 16 months after that scratch. He didn't breeze for months after that scratch.
Yep.
Is there any possibility that there was nothing going on there? No, Obviously, there was a problem. Obviously, there were only two possibilities with Baffert's reaction. One would be that he understood that there was an issue, but was going to run the horse anyway, and was embarrassed that the vets forced the scratch. And so he implied that the horse was fine just to save face. The only other possibility that I can think of is that he failed to see the problem and never admitted fault, even after it became clear that there had been a problem. Either way, I frankly consider that to be damning. The only other note that I'll make on Laurel River is that there was a bit of a surprising to me post or article that was written a couple of days ago suggesting that he won't race again in 2024. It's just
really
it's April.
Wow.
Now I understand that in that part of the world, due to the heat, there are truncated racing seasons. But it still seems a bit odd that a horse that his trainer reported came out of the race, quote, bouncing. I mean, they're not going to bother to try. Juddmonte races everywhere. There are dirt races everywhere. There are dirt races in Japan. There are dirt races. It's strange.
And he's a proven commodity here. He's run on the dirt here.
He's run well, right. So that I don't have any strong opinion about the meaning of the apparent decision, but it does strike me as being odd, and I expect that I'm not alone.
And Joe, just so you know, I had to just look this up. Seymour, the trainer, actually did run a horse in the Kentucky Derby in 2022. Summer is tomorrow. At 40-1, the horse was in front at the first call, the second call, and lost by 64 lengths, but beat the ambulance by 2 lengths. It beat the ambulance. Okay. So anyway, that was Seymour's at least record here in the States.
Okay. Well, that's another interesting part of the Saturday card was that, there really haven't been any horses that have come from overseas and really made a dent in the Derby in recent years, whether it's Japan, whether it's the UAE, whether it's Europe or, Great Britain or France or one of those turfy countries. Like now you got a horse in Forever Young who on paper looks like a contender. And I guess we did have some contenders on paper last year with Derma Sotogake or Ushbit Tesoro, whichever one of those horses came and ran. I think it was Derma Sotogake who came and ran the Derby. Ushbit Tesoro's an older horse, but Forever Young is 5 for 5. He's by Real Steel, who's a deep impact sire. Like that line conceivably could win classic dirt races. And he's 2 for 2 in the UAE this year, or rather he won the Saudi Derby and the UAE Derby, 2 for 2 in the Middle East. I don't know, it's tough to project, I think, those horses because there's been such little success from the shippers, from the cross-Atlantic shippers into the Derby. I don't know, either of you guys really, do you think this might be the year? And Japan has trended in this direction to, starting to compete in some of our big races. Right. Do you think this is a year we have a real contender from overseas?
Well, and Joe, don't forget, they also have T.O. Password, who also has earned enough points and said that they are coming to the States to run in the Derby. So we're not going to have one, but possibly 2 Japanese horses, in here. And I know that it was, definitely the marketing plan for the Kentucky Derby and for the Triple Crown to not only engage, international horses for the Kentucky Derby, but to also grant them points and to grant them actually a win and you're in. As well as the 100-pointer that they have there. So they also are trying to make and market this as the world's race, just like the Breeders' Cup has done, trying to make it internationally. Tink, I'm going to let you take over in a second, but it looks like Japan is starting to make real inroads. They've won a couple of they've hit the board in a couple of Breeders' Cup. They won a Breeders' Cup last year, and it looks like that through buying a lot of our top fillies off the racetrack, that they are building a tremendous program there.
Yes, I agree with you, John, and I'm happy to see Japan meet with more and more success in the international game. I was sort of a naysayer or a skeptic a number of years ago. I remember arguing with someone online who's pretty well known in England and as a journalist about the quality of the Japanese horses that had been running on the international stage. But I'm no longer, taking that cynical position. They obviously are breeding and developing a lot of good horses, and it's great to see. It's a wonderful industry in Japan. If they haven't done it already, they should have some sort of Group 1 race named the Arthur Hancock, because he certainly played a pivotal role in. I'm not blaming him; he did what he had to do at the time. But no one could have predicted that Sunday Silence would be the Asia's version of Northern Dancer, which is essentially what has transpired. No, the Japanese have done a terrific job. As far as the chances that undefeated horse has in the Derby, he certainly has a chance. I'm sort of waiting for him to show what I would call a real acceleration. He strikes me as something of a grinder, and that's my biggest criticism of him. But I did read recently, and I wasn't aware of this prior to the race in Dubai, that in fact he had not shipped well to Saudi prior to that race. I didn't know that, and that makes that he was sort of all out to win the race in Saudi, not terribly impressive, but that puts an asterisk on that race and makes him more impressive when you consider that he then shipped on to Dubai and in fact ran an even better race. But again, my biggest criticism, if I were, making a book, I would say he would be a bigger threat in the Belmont than the Derby, because it's hard to win the Derby, without a good turn of foot. Maybe this horse has one, and I just haven't seen it yet. But I did watch some of his Japanese races as well, and he strikes me as more of a galloping type of horse that picks it up slowly and is maybe relentless, and obviously a very high class horse. But I wouldn't be. I'd be betting against him rather than on him. But I hope that he runs well in the Derby.
Yeah, no doubt. I think the more encouragement that international owners have to ship to our big races and kind of shrink the sport a little bit and make it like a more cohesive sport. Like I say the same thing when we start to send more and more horses to Royal Ascot. Like I wish we would send horses to the Melbourne Cup or some of these other big races in France. I think like anytime you get that stiff international competition, I think it's great for the game. And if we can shrink the landscape a little bit, I think that makes it a more interesting and entertaining product. I was just going to say my favorite flop from like the Dubai horses so far in the Derby was Thunder Snow in 2017. You guys remember that? They opened the gates and he just starts bucking and jumping around. And obviously not funny if you had bet on him, but come on. Like I kind of love it sometimes when horses are just like, nah, I don't feel like it today, because they are animals and they are in charge after all. So it's nice. It's nice that the humans get the reminder every once in a while that they don't want to go, they ain't going. So
going. Right.
That was exactly fun. But yeah, so one other topic we wanted to touch on was that you called out by name last week on our show, Tink. We had Jon Sikora.
You hit the big time. You thought the internet was the big time and social media, but you come on this show and all of a sudden you got a target on your back.
Yep, the big wigs are coming after you. So Jon Sikora was on our show last week. We had a really good conversation with him about some of the problems and potential solutions in horse racing. And he mentioned you, and he said he was very crediting and very gracious to you in terms of thinks you're an eloquent guy, smart guy, obviously. But he suggested that all you do is complain, basically, and don't give solutions to the problems. So the floor is yours. Like, how would you like to respond to that criticism from Jon Sikora?
Thank you, Joe. Well, first, I'd like to say that I find Jon Sikora to be a very interesting and creative and entertaining character in the industry. I mean, he's obviously successful too. That goes without saying, and comes from a very successful family in the industry. He has every reason to push for solutions, but I think that some of what he said, and I enjoyed the broadcast thoroughly, some of what he said last week, I think warrants responses, and I think some of it was dubious. So let me skip through these. I'll try not to be too long-winded. He began by mentioning that he thought that the Jockey Club was the wrong organization to create or impose a mare cap on the industry. And while I suppose that could be true, it seems like an odd assertion given what the Jockey Club's primary purpose is. The other point that I would make is, well, if they're the wrong ones to do that, the implication by Jon is that the right people to do it are the breeders themselves. And it's a bit difficult for me to see how that is not a foxes deciding who to guard the hen house situation. Not to say that breeders shouldn't play a role in the decision. Of course they should. But if the decision is going to be left up to them, is it really likely at all that there's ever going to be any kind of cap? I mean, I think the resounding answer is no. The next point I'd like to make is that Jon also said that there wasn't any science behind what the Jockey Club was trying to do. And well, Joe and Jon, we had a discussion about this in some depth a few weeks ago. And I'm not going to go through it again in depth, but in case Jon Sakura missed that episode, I'd like to make the point that in January of 2020, there was a genetic analysis of the world's thoroughbred population that was a study that was released. And it included over 10,000 thoroughbred racehorses from a number of countries. It's apparently the most comprehensive genetic analysis that's ever been performed on the thoroughbred racehorse breed. And according to them, it showed a, quote, striking temporal increase in inbreeding and regional variance across global thoroughbred populations during the last 5 decades, the last 50 years. In conclusion, they said, we report a highly significant increase in inbreeding, et cetera. And given the limited diversity in current thoroughbred pedigrees, genomics-based measuring high-density genome-wide SNP information and a large reference population are likely to offer the best opportunity to slow and reverse the potential effects of inbreeding. So my question, of course, to Jon Sakura is, on what basis does he claim that there's no science to support the need to address the problem of inbreeding in the industry? I'm not a geneticist. I haven't read all of the literature, but that seems to be pretty, impressive, that study, and the conclusions seem to be pretty clearly articulated and meaningful. So I'd be interested at some point to hear why Jon Sakura doesn't think that the science backs up the need for mare caps. Then, interestingly, and this is what I like, one of the things I like so much about Jon, is he did go off on some creative suggestions of his own, one of which was to tax foals at levels of 125 foals, 150, 175, 200, and so forth, and that would be a way, without instituting mare caps, that would be a way to penalize, so to speak, those stud farms that are breeding high volume stallions. And while I applaud his creative efforts to make the best use of the money that the Breeders' Cup has, which is part of what that proposal was about, and I also applaud him to try to help to level the playing field by requiring breeders of high volume stallions to pay their fair shares to the Breeders' Cup. That proposal would essentially help a narrow group of owners and people who race in the Breeders' Cup, and it would also coincide with the interest of Jon Sakura himself and his business. And by his own admission, it wouldn't address the mare caps or have any impact on high volume sires or related genetic issues. So while I think that his proposal of taxing relating to the Breeders' Cup, taxing on higher volume stallions is very interesting, and it may be a valuable thing to do in the industry, it doesn't really address the mare cap issue. He also had an interesting proposal about so-called golden ticket, where one race every Breeders' Cup, there'd be an additional $1 million from the Breeders' Cup fund added to the existing purse. And that would be a fun and interesting thing to do. But again, who are the ones who benefit from that? The owners and the breeders, who are his customers, coincidentally. And I also have a bit of a problem with it, because it's sort of the lottery mentality. I mean, 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 million isn't enough of a purse to get people excited about these races. I don't think another million, should be added to that. I think more money should be spent in other ways to help the industry in other ways. Jon then talked about super trainers. He admitted that it was a problem, which I appreciate, but he essentially said there's no way to resolve it, or wasn't aware of any way to resolve it. And then we get to what he said about me, and not just me. He wasn't just criticizing me. He was saying that those who articulate, whether they're eloquent or not, those who articulate criticisms, those who are critics of the industry, aren't helping. Basically, I'm paraphrasing, they aren't helping unless they're providing solutions or offering solutions. And so I want to say a few things about that. First of all, about the notion that criticism, well-founded, well-articulated criticism, is not valuable without solutions. Well, I disagree with that, and here's why I disagree with it. It should be obvious that without well-founded and clearly expressed criticisms, the pace at which such problems are addressed, let alone resolved, tends to be glacial in this industry. I mean, until social media gave voices to many of the critics, the racing industry had dragged its feet for literally decades on important issues such as wagering reform, breakage, for example, aftercare, which is suddenly a big deal. And we're all glad that it is. But do you think it would have been without the critics banging away online, without necessarily having a clear solution? They've been holding up a mirror, essentially. And it's important to do that. Lasix is another issue where progress has been made, et cetera. As for my personal contributions, I'm not claiming to have made any brilliant contributions to solving these problems. But in fact, to be fair, and because Jon apparently isn't aware of it, I have made a number of efforts to offer suggestions for solutions, and I'm just going to run through a few of them, not to be defensive, but because I think that these are things that are worth talking about. Reduce the graded races. There's a promiscuous explosion of graded races in the U.S. over the past several decades. It's not warranted. It's not good for the game. It's only good for owners and breeders and those who are involved in buying and selling horses. And this is an example of a change that would benefit both the breed and the game, but it would also, at least to some extent, potentially adversely impact the bottom line of breeders like John Sakura. And take into account that TOBA, Thoroughbred Owner and Breeder Association, controls the grading of stakes races. And John's brother, Glenn, of Hillendale in Canada, is on the board of trustees of TOBA. Have they attempted to use their influence to reduce the inflated number of graded races? Or, even more importantly, in my view, to stop this ridiculous situation where Derby preps are grade 1 races? There's absolutely no possible way to support that continued situation. Because as we know from last week's racing and this week's racing, what those grade 1 events do is to fracture instead of bring together the best of the 3-year-old colts. They're not bringing them all together. If they were bringing them all together, then fine, make it a grade 1. But they're doing the opposite of it. So why don't Jon and his brother address that problem? They're in a position to do it. They carry influence and are in a position to do it. Secondly, the genetic screening and guidance for mare caps that I just talked about based on that 2020 study, not my idea, but when someone brought it to my attention and I read it, makes a lot of sense to me. Does Jon not think that might be a viable solution to do genetic screening? And when we see too strong of a pattern of inbreeding, then the sires that are responsible for that inbreeding, maybe caps be put in place on those. I'm not sure why that wouldn't be a good first step toward a solution if it's not a solution in and of itself. As for the super trainers, maybe Jon didn't read this because it's fairly recent, but I actually did write something up on the super trainers recently, and these were some of the ideas that I proposed. A maximum of 100 horses in training, aggregate stalls on the tracks, no more than 75 at any single track for a single trainer. No prohibition on stock coming from farms or training centers, but a minimum of 1 month in allotted stalls on track before a horse can be entered in races to prevent people from just cycling in horses from off track. Trainers based at training centers like Graham Motion at Fair Hill would be able to use the full 100 stall allotment, and there would be efforts made to prevent what I call feeder trainers. Like it hasn't happened, but if someone like Tim Yakteen, who's obviously closely connected to Bob Baffert, were to be preparing horses on track and then just ship them to Baffert's stables to run, that would not be allowed either. Now, look, these are working ideas, but they're ideas. Those kind of restrictions would, beyond a shadow of a doubt, have a major impact on the volume imbalances in stables today. They would help to reverse the long-standing insidious trend of higher and higher concentrations of horses, including the best horses, into fewer and fewer hands. And over time, most importantly, in a way, in my view, it would help to revitalize the crucial, what I like to think of as the middle class of the American trainer population. The restrictions would also help to increase field sizes, make the game much more attractive for bettors, greatly help racing secretaries, and help trainers to be in a better position to develop their horses the right way. So, these are some examples of suggestions that I have made, and there are others. But this isn't about me. I'm not worried about criticisms from John Secura. I want people to listen to those who are making constructive suggestions and not dismiss them with a wave of the hand, whether it's because they don't know their real name or because they may not be familiar with their work, et cetera, et cetera. People should be welcoming. People in the industry should be welcoming constructive criticism, not dismissing it. So I'm off my soapbox.
Right. No, I think those are some excellent points, Tony, and that's one of the reasons why Joe and I have been so appreciative of you being on the show with us and of talking about some of these ideas and banting about, because Joe and I have very different viewpoints, vantage points, I should say, on a lot of these topics, and you're able to bring in additional credibility and fill the gaps of some of the things that maybe we don't see. I had an opportunity to talk to Jon Secura when I was down in Florida for a few minutes, and his comments to me, I took it a little differently as far as the Breeders' Cup ideas, and I looked at it as the Breeders' Cup is sitting on, some people say $80 to $90 million of dormant assets that literally are just sitting on their balance sheet. They're not doing anything with it. So for them to get off the stick and actually leverage the money in some way, whether it's an aftercare, I think everyone would agree that would be an important step, or something else. But to use it for purse money I think does a couple of things. Yes, it enriches literally the owners and the breeders and the trainers that are involved with those horses. But we talked about it earlier in this podcast where we said that there's such an oversaturation of interest in the Kentucky Derby. Well, the only way you can increase and raise the tide on the other races is by increasing interest in those races. So, would putting another $1 million into each of those purses make more eyeballs come in? I don't know. But if they did it in a lottery style where nobody knew which race was going to have the additional bonus money until the day of entries, I think that would increase some outside audience just because it is a lottery. But it's been shown through studies that the number of increased entries in a race increases wagering. So if the idea is to have, instead of having a 7-horse field in the filly and mare sprint, which has been kind of undervalued or underappreciated over the past couple of years, maybe if that was an additional increase in purse money or ended up being the golden ticket, and they had more interest and more entries, then that would kind of raise the level of that race, which would have more horses go in it, which would be more wagering. So I think it's a couple different ideas. Again, I don't want to put words in John's mouth because he's not here to necessarily talk about it. But I actually endorse the idea of having an entity utilize assets that they have instead of having it just sit dormant on their balance sheet, not helping anybody except for the investment advisor who manages the money. So I'm very happy that we're having these conversations, whether it's your ideas, which I think are outstanding, or John Secura's ideas, which I think are also very creative. We've all agreed that we need to have some communication and some kind of momentum to make this industry go forward, because otherwise, if money is dormant and energies are dormant, then we're going to go extinct.
I think, John, that we're on the same page, that dormant money shouldn't be left dormant. It should be utilized. But here's where I don't know that we differ, but here's how I would think about it differently. Instead of further enriching purses that are already very high, why not use some of that money to create a series of races and promote a series of mile races on dirt leading up to the Breeders' Cup Mile, and help to reduce the pressure on the Derby, where many times milers are inappropriately sent to that race. If there were big purse mile races like the Guineas elsewhere, and an exciting series of races, that to me would be a tremendously positive use of excess funds.
Absolutely. And the key is to get enough creative entrepreneurial people together to help push this boulder up the hill. And I think what you said before is very appropriate. And it's not just to sit on the sidelines and throw Molotov cocktails at people that are trying to be creative and come up with it. There's no perfect solution for any of this stuff, but we need to have some thoughts and some plans, actually set into motion, because otherwise we're not going to be around very much longer. So I can't thank you enough, Tony, for not only saying what you've been saying online for years and years, but then coming aboard and educating. Joe's already smart, but educating me on so many of these topics, because it makes me think about things differently. And that's really the most important aspect of all of these conversations and of Think Tank, is that, there are solutions. There are very smart people that are around here. Maybe they're coming up with solutions. They just don't have the soapbox to be able to promote it from.
We're always happy to give Tink that soapbox. And I agree with your assertion that not every criticism has to be paired with the solution. Sometimes the criticism in itself exposes things that lead to solutions. So, Tony, it was great to see you finally, and great to talk to you as always. And we'll bring you back on real soon. Appreciate the time, brother.
Thank you. I look forward to it. Great to toss things around with you guys again.
Always.
Thanks.
Rail Talk is sponsored by The Green Group. The Green Group is the #1 accounting firm in the horse business. You know that already, but there's one reason no other CPA firm knows the horse industry like they do. Len's got over 200 horses with DJ Stable. They've won over 2,500 races, and they've got over 800 clients in the horse business because they make them money and save them taxes exclusively for Rail Talk listeners. And this is expiring very soon. As of now, we're 12 days away from tax day. Len will offer you a complimentary confidential half-hour consultation that he guarantees you'll get value from. 732-634-5100 is the number. You can visit them at greenco.com to learn more. Do it quickly. Do it now. No, Len's calendar is mighty booked, and it's not going to get any less booked as we ramp up in the next week and a half to tax day. Len guarantees he'll find you savings and value. He'll donate to your favorite charity or whatever you want. He's not worried. He's found value before, knows he can do it with you, and the clock is ticking. So hit him up. greenco.com, 732-634-5100. Mention Rail Talk. Mention his favorite son, Joe Bianca. Len will take care of you. So shout out to Tinky for stopping by and coming back on for Tank Tank. We always appreciate his insight, and it's just the great conversations we have. I feel like the show has been enriched so much with him deciding to come aboard and chat with us. Great to see him and hear him in full now. So thanks to Tinky for stopping by, and we'll look forward to seeing him again soon. It's been a great episode 37. Appreciate my co-pilot, Jon Green. Thanks to our producer, Patty Wolf. Our associate producers, Anthony LaRocca, Aaliyah LaRocca, Nathan Wilkinson, Julia Agresta. Thanks to you for watching, the viewers and the listeners, and shout out to the sponsors. We'll see you back here real soon on Rail Talk.